Matthew, my guy, how's it going today?
I'm good, Rashid. How are you doing?
I'm pretty good, man. Well, honestly, this is what took place. We're about to go in the air, and we're having bad weather down here. And my monitors on this side shut down on me, and I had some stuff up there I wanted to ask you about, but it's coming on up again. Luckily, I haven't.
Okay, well, we'll improvise something, and things will just work out as they always do. It's okay.
Yeah. Hey, Matthew, what is going on with these people, man? There was a article that came out today on Harold Turner radio saying that the Netherlands has authorized Ukraine to use their weapons that they supply to Ukraine for deep strikes into Russian territory. This is on the heel of the U.S. and the U.K. Openly advocating for this thing. And I want to play a clip at the start of the show because this goes right along with the questioning that I'm saying. I played it on my earlier show, and I want you to listen to this, and I want you to tell me whether or not that they have just declined into total madness with the policies of the Western world. So here is the clip. Right. Let's see if it's still up here. I may have deleted it. Okay, here we are. Right here. Oh, oops. I'm sorry.
So, U.S. President Joe Biden says Washington is working out the details to give Kiev the green light to strike deep into Russian territory, an act of war previously banned by America.
Will you lift restrictions on the use of long-range weapons by Ukraine?
We're working that out right now.
Well, it's a big political game, if you will, with human lives being as game pieces in this particular situation, because weapons of all kinds have been used by Ukraine to attack Russian territory. And hundreds, if not thousands, of civilians have already been killed in Belgorod, in Donetsk, in Zaporozhye, Kherson, and other areas of Russia. Now, they are saying that this is going to be a big game changer if Ukraine is allowed to do long-range strikes. But really, this is all, of course, happening while the State Secretary of the United States, Anthony Blinken, is about to visit Ukraine along with his UK counterpart, David Lammy. So they're making this big tour for the press.
It's one thing to talk about supplying these long-range weapons and giving Kiev the green light to strike deep inside Russian territory, but we all know that up and down the front lines, the Ukrainian offensive and the Ukrainian military is just collapsing right now. And you've spent so much time near the front lines, all up and down the region. I mean, what can you tell us?
Well, at the moment, the front line for Ukraine, for example, in the republics of Donbass, in Lugansk and Donetsk, it's completely collapsing. Right now, every single day, Russian army is making gains in Donetsk People's Republic, for example. Over the last 24 hours, they gained at least 130 square kilometers of territory. Yeah. And but these type of news, they go muted in the Western world, and nobody talks about that. But what they like to talk about is how to use long-range missiles deep into Russian territory. But how is that going to change the situation? It's very unclear because, and once again, this is all a big game, a lot of saber rattling, if you will, but with absolutely nothing behind it. For example, we have another soundbite here from the Defense Secretary of the United States, Mr. Austin, who confirms what I just said, that these long-range missiles will not make any change. Let's take a listen.
We said all along, Uta, there's no one capability that will, in and of itself, be decisive in this campaign. You know, we had this discussion about tanks. We had this discussion about other capabilities. And each time we point out that it's not just one thing, it's the combination of capabilities and how you integrate those capabilities to achieve objectives. So I don't believe that one specific capability is going to be decisive.
One thing that everybody tends to forget about in this situation is the cost of all this, and the cost is human lives. Civilians die every single day in Russia as a result of these attacks. But If this situation goes through and Ukraine is officially allowed to use ATACMS deep into Russian territory, and we have the example of them, of their terrorist attacks where a lot of civilians are getting killed, and Russia is forced to respond, what is that going to lead to eventually? And it's not going to lead to peace, that's for sure.
So what is your take on that? It seems like we're spiraling down that yellow brick road to all out confrontation and war, because if this was Russia arming like rebels that want to free Texas from U.S. control that were residing in Mexico, Mexicans that want Texas back part of Mexico, and Russia decided to hand over some Iskander missiles or some cruise missiles, then the United States would take that as a declaration of war. So what is going on?
Well, it does appear to be that the lunatics have really taken over the asylum, right? I mean, you think that there's so many reminders of the unwinnability of a nuclear war that would easily escalate in a pinch if this is pushed on, and they're pushing only harder and harder, regardless of the warnings that the Russians have made. The fact that the Russians have modified their nuclear doctrine and have made the point that if they feel existentially threatened, they will be forced to utilize their nuclear warhead capabilities. Now, Russia has, as well, since 2018, Putin has unveiled wave after wave of evidence that next generation hypersonic missiles that far outpace anything which those computer programmers managing the Rand Corporation game theory scenarios that have gamed out all of these different scenarios utilizing probability theory that has allowed them to conclude that, okay, there's a 30% chance that we could win a nuclear war by destroying all of Russia's ICBM silos, and the same thing for China, which has built something like 300 in the past 4 years. There's like a 30% chance of this, and then a 40% chance that there'd be this amount of collateral damage in Europe and our other partners, but that's okay, so you've got these crazy people who have no attachment to their humanity, who have been trained over decades at thinking like human computers, that are making policy for the United States. And it seems like instead of just negotiating or having like a human to human discussion the way JFK did in the times of crisis of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where he was able to pick up a phone and talk to another human being on the other side of the Iron Curtain. There's none of that capability, it seems, within the governing strata of the West when they're challenged, or when their doctrine of full spectrum hegemony is being challenged by very powerful nations that want nothing to do with that. So, you have like Biden, whatever the hell he is at this point, meeting up with Keir Starmer. And they're supposed to meet on September 13th, right, to discuss like whether or not that they're going to also allow Kiev to utilize especially the U.S. long-range precision missiles that could be used to be struck deep into the heart of Russian territory. We already know that there's Anglo-American, French, and other foreign legionnaires operating within the Kievan military that were exposed, for the last 2 years, but big time in the invasion of Kursk, where he heard, recording after recording of foreign voices obviously being put into the face of the Russians, just as a reminder that, yeah, by the way, this isn't about Ukraine. This is about all of NATO. We're all at war with you. We all want to destroy you. So I don't know if they're still playing I guess they are. They're still playing this nuclear game of chicken, presuming that that's what this is just another game theory, another game model that you can just play. And they don't realize that it's not a video game. This is reality. They're the people who are making the video games or these scenarios have children, have families, I presume, that will die, and they don't seem to have that connection that this thing on the computer screen that's making reality, it's shaping reality. They don't realize that this is totally destroying their families. So that's a crisis intellectually that is concerning to me. But yeah, sure, huge.
It seems like they're so detached from reality that it's hard to throw out a fishing rod and reel them back in, because first of all, Russia has demonstrated, as I said earlier on when I was interviewing Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst earlier. Russia has demonstrated through the destruction of a NATO armed and trained military 3 times. We're in the 4th going with the destruction of the Ukrainian army. They are destroying all of the so-called advanced weapons that are being supplied by NATO to Ukraine, and then Russia has demonstrated that it is leaps and bounds ahead of them in missile technology and missile defense technology, and yet they are still pushing this thing towards war. Could it be that in the minds of the leaders of the West, they understand that they now, the European Union is spiraling out of control with debt. The United States has an unpayable debt that even if all of the nations on earth got together, they could not pay down the debt. Could this be a last gasp act of desperation to try to cower the nations to maintain dollar hegemony? Or else they're saying, listen, if I can't rule, I'm prepared to kill everybody.
Yeah, I think you're thinking on the right level, man. I mean, honestly, I think the same. Although, you know me, like I tend to see things from a nested layer of motives. So there's like mechanisms within mechanisms. Now, one of the big mechanisms is exactly what you said. I believe that a big chunk of the U.S. security establishment and deep state do think they are motivated by exactly what you said. And in a time when there is a financial crisis brought on by our own sin, our own desire to make money out of gambling and not produce and merit what value we expected the U.S. dollar to carry. Yeah, I mean that went on for decades, and so the expected consequence of deregulating the system, allowing private financier corporate interests to have more power than nation states, which was the foreseeable consequence of the mass deregulation of the 70s that went on to the 80s, that got even worse in the 90s. That it transformed our economy into a time bomb. Now, I think that those who managed that transformation of the economy from a viable industrial economy of the 50s and 60s into a total time bomb of speculative consumer society insanity, I think that they knew exactly what they were doing, and I think that they knew that they were creating a time bomb in the same way that I think that those who imposed the system of the Versailles Treaty debt repayments onto Germany in the 1920s knew exactly that was going to blow out the economy into a hyperinflationary blowout. I think that those who brought about the deregulation of 1924, 1925, 1926 in the United States, that created the easy money age of just it was the party era for the elites, where they were able to make easy money without earning it. Those who orchestrated that policy transformation over the dead body of Warren Harding, the president who sabotaged the League of Nations One World Government in 1923. That President Warren Harding, who died by very mysterious circumstances. When he died, there was a complete transformation of the U.S. policy overseen by Mellon, the finance minister, Coolidge, who was a sort of proto-George Bush puppet idiot, who brought in all of these J.P. Morgan hacks to shape U.S. internal economic policy that resulted in creating bubbles where there was once a viable economy that could then be detonated by a pinprick. And that was the Great Depression, the 1929 blowout. So I think that we've got something in play right now, which is larger in scope and scale, because now we're dealing with, a $1.4, $1.5 quadrillion speculative derivatives time bomb that's been built up, especially since 87, when the economy really blew out. When I was just a little kid, that's when our economy blew out. And Alan Greenspan came about this as a solution. Instead of dealing with the economic crisis as he should have, he instead normalized derivatives and other creative financial instruments that you formerly would have gone to jail, like Michael Milken did for playing with, like junk bonds, or gambling with derivative, differentials in the prices of whatever securitized debt commodity was being gambled upon and insured on the spot or futures markets. So he just went and did something that made an already bad situation infinitely bad. And now it's been like almost 40 years of this deterioration. And yeah, I think that they might want to kick over the chessboard and then blame Russia or blame Iran or blame China or whoever as being the cause of all of our economic woes and desperation, and the fact that we can't feed our family and we're afraid. And so they like that. And they might be, they might like to trigger some sort of another. It's 9/11 today, right? That was a false flag. We now know in hindsight, there's been bountiful evidence that we were lied to. That dude in the cave actually had nothing to do with orchestrating 9/11 at all. And yet it justified us giving our acquiescence to eating freedom fries because Chirac didn't want to like back up our bombing of this country that had nothing to do with 9/11. And we supported, we even, like, Democrat and Republican alike, right? People marched in lockstep by and large and supported this infinite war of this clash of civilizations that Zbigniew had wired into our system back in the 70s. And then they really amplified it with Clean Break and Richard Helms and the neocon resurgence in 96, 97 over Yitzhak Rabin's dead body. That's when they brought in Bibi Netanyahu and started triggering that new Anglo-Zionist, Christian Zionist freak show that did so much damage to the world, but then brought in this, neocon Straussian takeover of government by forever crisis. So whenever you were in forever, as long as you were in crisis, you could always utilize executive orders to bypass the democratic aspect of government. And we've been in crisis now for 23 years since 9/11, and we've done so much damage. The consequences are still there, and now we're like the system is melting down. It's unstoppable. It hasn't fully hit the chain reaction blow yet. There's a number of spark plugs, triggers that could be struck to blow out the system. It seems as though they haven't felt comfortable blowing it out yet, though I feel like had Russia and China or Iran and the BRICS Plus, had they not done what they did over the past decade, I think that they would have already blown out the system, believing that every nation was locked in the building that was going down and blown out together. But now that a whole bunch of countries have gotten out of the building, they've been trying to sabotage from other asymmetrical means possible to weaken those countries that are not really getting weak as those game planners want. And so they're now in a situation where they're saying, well, okay, let's pull out, whether it's a cyber polygon, cyber attack that we could blame on the Russians or the Chinese or some combination, or maybe doing something with the Iranians and saying that they tried to kill Biden and Trump. Let's just make stuff up that would then convince a bunch of dumbed down people that they're the cause of our economy blowing down. And then we can issue under crisis a new type of dollar, a new type of thing tied to exactly what they did in Weimar in 1923, right? When people who had billions and billions of dollars of Reichsmarks that were worth nothing could bring in their wheelbarrows of money to Hjalmar Schacht, who had been trained by Montague Norman at the Bank of England, that was Hitler's finance minister, and trade your wheelbarrow of billions for one new Rentenmark. But that new Rentenmark would be now associated with a new set of rules that would be much more libertarian in scope, much more based upon shutting down government jobs, government services, a whole new set of things and that's what I think that they want to do with this whole new, idea of a central bank digital currencies that they could only bring online if they blow out what currently exists and have it tied to the types of behaviors that people like Mark Carney, who's currently being positioned to become the new Prime Minister of Canada, or Chrystia Freeland, who works closely with Mark Carney, or any of these freaks and technocrats managing a big chunk of the Western establishment. They want a new set of rules of economic behavior to recondition both individuals but also corporations to behave in ways that will induce us to depopulate and shut down our living standards ourselves by monetarily incentivizing activity like eating bugs instead of eating meat, or driving your bike and getting rid of your car, or whatever, or getting whatever injection of something that will deprive you of your universal basic income if you don't do the thing that you signed up for to get your universal basic income, because there's no other economy, whatever. So they've got this whole dystopian logic. Russia and China and India are bringing online with other countries, Iran and many others, a different type of idea of economic value, which is incompatible with this dark age doctrine, which I think gives me a lot of hope, but I think they want to destroy it. So all that to say, yes, I share your concern. I believe that they might try to do total war to try to rearrange their banking system under the fog of war. That's a concern for sure.
Why isn't it that more people know about the connection, like Freeland, Newland, and the neocons, the connection with fascism, Nazism, and their connection and their roots being over in the very area that they're waging war against Russia? Why isn't a lot known about those connections? Hillary Clinton, all of those people have their roots in that area of Ukraine, Romania, and those areas over there. And why isn't there anyone talking about that?
Hillary has her connections to that
Rodham,
zone too?
yeah, the Rodham clan. Yeah, the Rodham clan has connections over there also.
Get out. I didn't know that.
No.
Huh.
No. But why don't you think no one's talking about those connections with Nazism, fascism, and the push for war, and the West backing the Nazis in Ukraine to take over Ukraine against Russia?
It's weird, eh? It's like I'm in Canada, and it wasn't that long ago that the whole Canadian Parliament stood up in a standing ovation for a Nazi SS Panzer Division Ukrainian freak killer who was part of the worst branch of the Bandera, Organization for Ukrainian Nationalist Collaborators in Ukraine. And this old guy, forgetting his name now, but he was given like this celebration in the Canadian Parliament. Our Speaker of the House actually got his ass fired because he was like, I mean, they threw him under the bus, this poor schmuck. But obviously, like, you heard this guy reading this speech, and Zelensky was there. Zelensky's wife was there. Chrystia Freeland was there. Her grandfather, like you said, Michael Chomiak, was the guy who was one of the closest, most powerful. Hunka. Somebody just wrote Hunka. Yeah, that's right. Hunka.
Yeah.
That was the Nazi who
Yaroslav
celebrated
it. Yaroslav.
Yeah. It was a joke. It was a sick joke. But nobody saw it. And this Speaker of the House of the Canadian Parliament who got fired was reading a speech, and you could see that even he kind of knew that something weird was happening. And somebody, whoever wrote a speech, had said, like, this guy Hunka that we're going to be celebrating today was fighting the Russians in World War II, and he had to stop. You could see he stopped for like 2 seconds in his speech. He's like fighting the Russians in World War II, and then he got back on track, right, as a politician, because he knew that meant you're on the other side. You're with the Nazis, and he's hoping that nobody noticed. And it didn't seem like anybody noticed because it was like a full standing ovation from all parties at the time, and it was only in hindsight, after it was discovered that Hunka was already invited by Freeland to go and meet up with Justin Trudeau in his personal office and all this stuff, and his family had taken photographs. All this was known. All of this was known. It is known that Andrei Perubi, who was like a leading Azov Nazi who had come to Canada on several occasions, personal friend of Chrystia Freeland, it was known that these people are walking around with swastikas and they've got a Bandera pro-Nazi thing. And Chrystia Freeland, it's known she helped put together the papers for her uncle, who was a professor, who was compiling all of the information about her grandfather's role in Nazi Germany, or its pro-Nazi fascists within Ukraine in World War II, at rounding up all of these different Slavs and Poles and gays and everything else and killing them, over like 90,000 people. And she helped put together some of those papers, thinking that, yeah, what a great thing my grandpa did. And her uncle, who was the professor, came out saying, like, yeah, she even though she distanced herself from support, she's saying that her grandfather was helping the Jews. It's actually not true. And her uncle said that, she was working with when she was not in politics yet. So why is this not better, more well known? It's one of those things, living in an Orwellian state. There's just certain very obvious lines of conversation you're not allowed to have. And because it's all run, I guess, by the power of popular persuasion, like it's a behaviorist system that we live in, right? So the idea of behaviorist economists, behaviorist social engineers who study Pavlov or B.F. Skinner's theories, they're of the view, or this is also rooted in Adam Smith as well, in Smith's ideas of moral sentiments and how human beings are adaptive rather than creative beings. And so the idea amongst these social engineers is that we are blank slates. There is no such thing as a conscience that you can map, because you can't map a conscience onto a computer model, a binary 1-0 computer model, it can't exist because they only believe in things that you can map and measure that can be expressed in the form of computer metrics. So they're of the view that, well, okay, what is true is whoever has the power to get their definition of reality to be the acceptable calibrator around which everybody adapts to. And then you can create these clusters of opinion that they believe that has a gravitational force that people want to adapt to, or because they would rather be heard saying the right thing rather than say what they believe to be true. That's the philosophy of the oligarchy. So and it kind of works to the degree that you can get people to normalize stupidity and mediocrity and not really truly understand how their mind works and how their conscience works, to the degree that you can like manage an education system that creates decrepit, broken people thinking that they're smart, and to the degree that you can create cultural mediocrity within our music, within our films, within our video games, within our drug culture, which is somehow like now a normalized thing. To the degree that happens, nobody knows themselves. So nobody can really use their judgment. And because they can't use their judgment, the best thing that they can do to have a conviction of something is to try to sound smart by adopting the opinions of what some authorities from their school or work or whatever, or Wikipedia, have asserted to be a consensus view, or just adopt whatever opinions your local friends have. If they're laughing at, a political figure, you laugh at that political figure, even if you don't think that. And fewer people are able to stand up on their own accord and their own convictions and say to the mob, no, you're all wrong. Like the kid who says, the emperor has no clothes. That was a liberating kid. Like that kid broke everybody free. But today there's so few people who have that sovereign power. So that's part of what I'm thinking about when I hear you ask that question. Like, why don't people talk about this thing that's obviously this elephant in the room that's staring at them in the face? They could all smell the shit of the elephant that's been like just pooping in the room for the like. It's clear what it is, and nobody can say it. Right?
And why don't you've already answered, but I want you to go into it. And why isn't anyone talking about the direct connection with these people who are in power, with the people who tried a coup in the United States under Roosevelt? Fascist coup. They have.
Oh, damn.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's so good. But again, like, it's a good question, and it's I guess it's part of this compartmentalization thing. I think about this a lot too, right? Like, why is it that people can so often be either very, very aware of the intricacies of their current world, but not realize how their deep past, maybe a few generations severed from their current life, is affecting the current world that they seem to know a lot about, or inversely, how many people can know a lot about history. Like I was rewatching the Oliver Stone Untold History of the United States not that long ago, and it's like 8 episodes. I don't know if you've seen that documentary series. It's not bad, but it's like the first 3 episodes are good, and it starts from like, the battle between Winston Churchill and the Battle of the British Empire to stay in control of the world, in opposition to the ideas of Franklin Roosevelt and Henry Wallace, who wished to undo the system of empire and introduce a new system of higher anti-Hobbesian win-win cooperation based on externalizing or expanding the New Deal principles to assist Africa and Asia and India to industrialize the way the United States had transformed itself during the 1930s. That was subverted. It was FDR was killed. I say killed, and again, anyone could challenge me. I stand by. He was poisoned. FDR and all of the people who thought and who were fighting for this dream were all ousted, and some were murdered, like Harry Dexter White. Others were just like had their careers ruined by being called red commies under the new Cold War. But the point is, what happened was that the enemies of FDR, who were the same agencies who were sponsored by JP Morgan, DuPont, Rockefeller, Standard Oil, who were the ones backing up the rise of Nazism, who were backing up and sponsoring the growth of fascism, and in the New York Times, like Henry Luce, who was like the manager of Time Life magazine, Time magazine, Fortune magazine. They were like hardcore pro-fascist sponsors in the United States. And they were behind, as Smedley Butler pointed out. in his address to the American people in 1935 or 36, he pointed it out that this was the agency that was trying to use him as a war hero to install a military fascist dictatorship of a puppet regime by overthrowing Roosevelt and bringing the U.S. ultimately into an alliance with Nazi Germany. And that's what these Wall Street, London fascist eugenics financiers wanted, as did their counterparts in London. King Edward the Eighth, who was the Nazi king, and who was it else? I mean, you had Lloyd George, who was going to become prime minister again, representing another faction of the eugenics Nazi, pro-Nazi British fascist regime, and Oswald Mosley, who also was a Fabian theosophist, who was also had a huge ambition to become prime minister, the Nazi prime minister of England. They were all like ready to go, especially after the Nazis had taken control of most of Europe. Like, most of Europe had fallen to the Nazis largely through the help. And Alex Krainer, who's a fantastic geoeconomic analyst, did a great history trilogy where he proved this decisively, that it was British back-channel diplomacy that resulted in the Nazi successful takeover of Czechoslovakia, first Austria, then Czechoslovakia, and then Poland. All of that was being managed by British imperial diplomacy and espionage. So, the world came close. And it was the same people who were doing that who wanted this one world government of a eugenics religion that's essentially a precursor to today's transhumanism, who were behind the attempted murders of Franklin Roosevelt. And I say murders plural because there were 2 known attempted murders in 1933 February, and again in 1934 with Smedley Butler, who blew the whistle. And when you look at, what didn't happen in 1945? Well, what did happen is Roosevelt died way too early in his first months of his fourth term in office. Presidency, yeah. And immediately over the wake of his dead body, you had this fifth columnist takeover that were the same agencies that tried to kill him. They finally took over, and he had talked about that with his son, who documented that in the book As He Saw It in 1946, published, Elliot Roosevelt. And this Anglo-American thing set up the CIA. They're the ones who made sure that the leading SS top official Nazis were not punished at Nuremberg. A few were thrown under the bus and given, they had to satisfy the desires of the people who had suffered so much to stop Nazism, that they were like, okay, well, we can't just give the Nazis and the Italian and Japanese fascists so overtly new jobs working for us against the communists. So they had to do a little bit of a song and dance around the Nuremberg trials. But then, leading Nazis were brought in through the rat line into Latin America, into especially Argentina, which became like a Nazi hub overseen by Allen Dulles. They were brought into NATO very quickly, and you had 12? I think it was 12 high-level Nazis who were made the NATO Supreme Commanders of Central and Eastern European Command from 1956 until 1983. 12 consecutively, including Alfred Herrhausen, Alfred Heusinger. Alfred Heusinger, who was Hitler's chief of staff. And then you had, what was his name? Galen, Reinhold Galen, who was also made the head of the Bundeswehr, the Germans, what became German secret intelligence and the German secret police. All of these people were working now all of a sudden for Allen Dulles, MI6, NATO, and they were the ones who were all of a sudden assigned to manage our history textbooks. So you had a lot of these creatures who were what's his name? Lebed, Michelo Lebed, who was an associate of Stefan Bandera, who was brought in to the CIA and to the United States and assigned for 40 years until he died in the late 80s to rewrite all of the history of World War II, first for the Ukrainian diaspora, but then that expanded to the more broader population, informing people around the story of what caused the famine of 1932-33. He rewrote everything to make World War II appear to be about the bad guy of World War II, which was all of a sudden not the Nazis, but the Russians. became the bad guy. The Nazis were like the less bad guy that it's kind of good that we kind of wanted to work with. And, like all of this stuff was rewritten to create a victim identity for the Ukrainian diaspora, but then to also like polarize the Western population into a fear frenzy for McCarthy, for the whole Cold War game masters who wanted us to be to see the Russians or the Chinese as being the subhuman, commie, Borg, evil thing that was less than human, that we would acquiesce to working even with Nazis, killing leaders like Nkrumah, or even our own leaders like JFK, who was trying to work with the Russians on harmonious relations and cooperation to break free of the Cold War and the mutually assured destruction thing. So, like we've got all of this trauma and brainwashing over generations that's been imbued into us transgenerationally, which was never resolved with the collapse of the Soviet Union, which, as I've come to discover, was actually itself a CIA Esalen Institute funded operation run by Lawrence Rockefeller, who was basically able to bring in a bunch of like Kremlin associated occultists and mystics that had a huge amount of influence with Boris Yeltsin, who was brought into Big Sur, California to go through like, transcendental meditation orgies and other things at the Esalen Institute, funded by Lawrence Rockefeller through his American-Russian Friendship Association, in order to encourage the growth of this parasite inside of Russia that manifested with Gorbachev and Yeltsin, who were able to then like systematically undo Russia from the inside in order to make way for a new world order of a revived, rebranded Trotskyist, cybernetics, green occultism that people like Jeffrey Sachs were overseeing on behalf of the London School of Economics. So that's what Jeffrey Sachs, which is why I don't trust Jeffrey Sachs. He just knows too much. He's too high up in the chain of command for me to believe that his current story of him just being like this, I didn't know, I wanted to do good. We did good with Poland, and now we thought we were doing good with Russia, and I didn't know that all these things were going to happen. No, I think he knew exactly what was going to happen. He's working with, Andrew, some of the worst aspects of Chubai and all of the Russian oligarchs. He knew exactly. He was in bed with the highest levels of the global oligarchy, and they were bringing about a one world government of a cybernetics transhumanist dictatorship to promote a neo-Trotskyist technocratic managerial elite shutdown of the world economy under this new sort of like state system of global control and Malthusianism. They came close, and so all of this happened, right? Like our history's been rewritten by those who wanted to kill us in the 1930s and 40s. They rewrote our history, and so it's very difficult for people today to break free of that and to look objectively at what 1933-34 was all about, what the last 50, 60 years, who killed JFK, how is the murder of JFK tied to the thing that did 9/11? It's the same thing. Even though many of the players are dead, they're separated by 40 years. It's the same parasite operating with the same mandate that did 9/11. That's also behind October 6th in Israel. It's all part of the same thing. And it's it's challenging for people whose minds have been compartmentalized. We've been, what is compartmentalization? It's people have been induced to master. If you're an academic, you're trained to master highly detailed bits of information that are devoid of context. So you can write a 400-page master or a PhD thesis in political science about, the Swedish mercenaries operating within Germany during the 1943 period of the 30 Years' War and the socioeconomic effects on the peasant class by whatever. Like you could just dissect, but there's no context that's being given, and so we have to sort of retrain ourselves to think about how does things that happened a century ago or more ago have more impact on what we're going through today than perhaps things that happened a week ago, because they do, right? And it's just it takes time to rewire.
That's one of the reasons I was bringing up these points. For those of you who don't know, you can go to this channel main page, and I've interviewed Alex Craner multiple times, and he's talked on a lot of things that Matthew is talking about. He's a good associate of mine. You can check him out. We've done hour and a half long videos. As a matter of fact, we've done one a few days ago. So check it out. Now, in the before I go to what's on the screen here, in the chat, Gold Mole 242 says, "What does Matthew think of recent historian on Tucker Carlson?"
Great question. I'm about to write something on that if I have time. But I watched it, and it's trash. It's really dangerous trash, in my opinion. Yeah, I'm guessing he's talking about Daryl Cooper, whom I'd never heard of until I watched the interview with Tucker Carlson, because it went viral. So I had to watch it. But I think there's a lot of Delphic sleights of hand, and I feel like there was an attempted hypnotic induction of the population. That's what I feel like happened. I feel like it was a hypnotic induction of the population to believe a few very dangerous Trojan horses about history that would render us incapable of avoiding becoming fascist in our current situation in the present. And I don't know to what degree Tucker is aware, or even Daryl is aware of what they do. I don't know. But I feel like Daryl probably has done enough work and research, according to his own testimonial, to know that he's probably either dumb or bullshitting, like a smart dumb, like people who really like know their material, but then there's like this dumb factor. So number one, he would have us presume that it were best that Churchill and the West worked, or basically accepted Hitler's victory over mainland Europe and basically didn't try to stop Hitler. That's one of the theses he's been putting forth, is that FDR and Churchill did bad by trying to fight Hitler. If that's based on the assumption that Hitler really just was a nationalist who just wanted to be left alone and have his own sovereignty, that assumption is false. Hitler actually had the view of expansionism. It was an imperial fascism. He wasn't really a nationalist in that sense. And he made it very clear that he saw Russia as a slave colony that would be exploited as he controlled the heartland, the Mackinder heartland, to extract wealth from, Ukraine, but Russia more broadly. And he did ideologically believe that the Slavic people were a subhuman race that deserved to be enslaved by a master class, a higher race of Aryans, of which he believed for some reason himself to be a part of, even though his grandmother was Jewish, which is weird. Okay. I want only blonde-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful people to rule. And it's like, dude, no, you're not either of those things. So I for me, I know it's like Cooper is just completely ignoring what is very not secretive information about the pro-Nazi coup d'etat run by Wall Street inside of America against Wall Street that failed with Smedley Butler. He knows about that, but he chooses to ignore it because it breaks the narrative, the story that he wishes to promote to people. He also uses this Frankfurt School. There's something that was done with the Frankfurt School takeover of historical analysis, led by people like Georg Lukács, especially in the 1950s and 60s, people like Theodor Adorno, as they were given new jobs under the CIA and the Congress for Cultural Freedom before their ideas, their insipid ideas, started shaping our school systems, and how things like critical theory that became critical race theory, how these things indoctrinated several generations of useful idiots, young people, starting in the 60s, around being basically victimized with the idea that all dead white European males are equally bad and hypocritical and thus should all be overthrown equally, irregardless if they were like good men or bad men. Who cares? They're white. They're thus the dominant race of white men, and thus they were all equally invalid, and we should now create a new type of start from scratch, right? Blank slate. Erase the blackboard, start from scratch with new realistic, nihilistic thinkers like Sartre and Jean Jaurès, and like the relevant nihilistic Nietzsche. Maybe he's an okay dead white guy for some reason. Like that became the framework around which the new generation was allowed to be built up, with the idea that systemic racism, all of this was like shaping the world that they were living in. If they were black, if they were woman, if they were whatever minority group that if they were gay, your identity was less a human and now more the attribute, whether black or gay or woman or whatever. That's now what you identified with. Human became even an irrelevant concept, an abstract, useless concept. So they became now weaponized as victimized, potentially fascist leaning people who thus wanted revenge. We saw the same thing play out with the victimization of the Jewish mindset as well, which resulted in people who just felt like the world wants to destroy you all the time, and it creates crazy if you allow yourself to go in that direction. Now, with the case of the way this worked was the Frankfurt School brought in Freudian psychoanalysis into the analysis of what motivates historical people to do things. So all of a sudden, Napoleon, when somebody were to ask, well, why did Napoleon do the wars he did to try to like conquer the world? Well, he had a little penis and he was trying to overcompensate for his little penis by trying to conquer the world. And they'd have like this Freudian psychodynamic thing about his insecurity complex. Or like, why did Churchill do the bombing of Dresden? Well, according to Daryl Cooper, who was interviewed by Tucker, it was because he was like, he had an insecurity complex because of his failure at the Turkish Gallipoli raid, which was a disaster. And so he wanted to compensate for what he felt he was lacking. And that's what Daryl Cooper says. He's like, that's why he did that's why he didn't accept Hitler's requests for a peace treaty with England. And all of that, it destroys the mind's ability to recognize what is the agency and nature of conspiracy. Churchill was part, as was Napoleon. They were part of a broader conspiracy. Churchill was a member of the round table movement of Cecil Rhodes and Milner. He was a part of that grouping of Lloyd George. He was part of that grouping of Milner and of Lord Lothian, which had been organized around the Cecil Rhodes Trust. That created the Council on Foreign Relations, Chatham House, which, by the way, Mark Carney, who's about to be made Prime Minister of Canada, technocrat, is the president of the Royal Institute for International Affairs, Chatham House. That's the queen of all think tanks, the mothership of the motherships, which Hillary Clinton called the CFR, the mothership, because it is. That's the British Roundtable movement in America baked into 1921. What else does Daryl Cooper say in his interview with Tucker Carlson? It doesn't matter what happened around World War I because that's not part of our dominant narrative. He actually says that. There's nothing really important about World War I that you could listen to. I'm just going to focus on World War II because World War II created a narrative that matters more to people than anything that happened in World War I, which is negligible. Now, for a guy who says that he's read like 800 books in the last 4 years, I don't believe that that's true. I don't believe he believes he what he says, because what I just said is serious. Like the orchestrators who made artificially World War I happen were the same people who wanted a one world government to happen under a League of Nations and managed by the Royal Institute for International Affairs, both of which were created in 1919 at the Treaty of Versailles by the same eugenicists like Emanuel House and others who had taken control, who had created the Federal Reserve. The same people, the same Max Vorburg, Paul Vorburg, who had also organized the Bolshevik Revolution to overthrow the Romanovs, and who had financed, Jacob Schiff was a part of this, who financed the Japanese fascists to grow before they were fascists, but they essentially were fascists. They didn't know it yet, to carry out a war against the Russians that destroyed 75% of the Russian Navy in 1904. And Jacob Schiff was awarded the highest honor of the Japanese military in 1905. These are all the same people. And you could know that. You could know so much about our current situation if you do look at that and what created the Council on Foreign Relations and all of the Rhodes Scholars that infested our deep state. You could know all of these things. And I'm pretty sure that Daryl Cooper would have to be a flame, like a total retarded idiot if he was looking at all of these books and didn't know that, or a liar. And I think I'm leaning to the second. And there's other things I could say, and I didn't even talk about Jonestown, because even what he says about Jonestown, I've read enough about Jonestown, and I didn't have to read 90 books. I just had to look at some qualitative analysis of people who actually did know what they were looking at to realize that was a CIA front that worked with the government of Guyana or Ghana. I'm mixing up my African nations here. Ghana. there was several Jonestowns that were all used for drug money laundering, a variety of other things, and these were not people who committed suicide. They were not people who committed suicide. After Congressman Ryan left and got killed, they were murdered, and there was evidence, plenty of evidence, that these were people who were murdered. They did not commit suicide. They did not, like, you can't learn about what the nature of the civil rights movement of Martin Luther King was by looking at the evolution of the Jonestown cult from the 1950s to the 70s. As Daryl Cooper says, it's the same thing. All of this is garbage. So it kind of pissed me off, and I think it's a gateway to getting people to sympathize ultimately with the protocols of Zion and reconstruction of history, because the idea is to take those who are conservative leaning and nudge them beyond being conservative into a reactionary fascist right-wing response to the technocratic fascist left-wing wokeism. That's the occult sort of induction. There's an induction at play right now to do this. And if people don't smell, everyone could see what fascism on the left looks like. They could see the World Economic Forum, and they could see all of that, and the WHO. They could see it. It's not too hard to see at this point, unless you're really dumb. But they find it very difficult to see what it looks like on the right. What the the Knights of Malta Opus Dei infiltration of the U.S. government. They find it very difficult to look at that stuff, and how Peter Thiel, how Elon Musk's Operation the Libertarian Empire that certain figures believe they can create by capturing through Trojan horses like the Heritage Foundation, the Trump momentum, and then redirecting it towards a new kind of empire. They find it very difficult to look at that because they're, anyway. That's the thing.
Before I go further, and I know the time is limited, Collie Beans, one of the chat members, says that, can you recommend a book on this topic?
On everything I just said?
Yeah, your books.
I don't want to sound like a shameless self-promoter, but you said it, not me. Yeah, okay, my books. No, look, I did books. Yeah, I did 5 volumes of the Clash of the Two Americas, and I tried to make this stuff as intelligible as possible. And obviously, I've got bibliography, so if people want to like read more of the stuff that I was reading to try to come up with my compositions, I try to make it easy. But Clash of the Two Americas, volume 1 to 5 or 1 to 4, and volume 5 is called The Science Unshackled, which is kind of an extension. And Untold History of Canada, volume 1 to 4. I did those 4 volumes before the Clash of the Two Americas. A lot of the stories, I tried to make it as intelligible and accessible, but not simplistic for as many people as possible. So those are available if they want to look into that stuff.
Everybody, the time is limited. I want to get in something, but before I do, I want to go back to something because Collie Beans had something up there. He says, Sachs is saying all the right things, though. So let me highlight it for you. Sachs is saying all the right things, though. So it's a bit odd, the thought that he would be a plant of some sort. Now, you can address that before I go into the last 1 or 2 questions.
I'd love to. No, honestly. And this is why I'm reticent to, like, I unleash today because I'm feeling annoyed, okay? Typically speaking, I try to be diplomatic because what I see when I look at somebody like a Sachs is somebody who represents a faction within the oligarchy that recognizes that it's not in the oligarchy's ultimate incentive to unleash nuclear war on the world. And I don't think that there's like one common beat frequency representing the entire strata of those families managing the high priesthoods of the oligarchy. I do see evidence of different factionalizations, kind of like what I inferred when I was mentioning this, the battle within the British elite classes of 1930 to especially the 1930s around whether you continue to support the Hitler Project or whether you abort and flush the Hitler Project and live to fight another day. It's kind of similar. There was a huge like knives out in Britain, it wasn't clean. Amory, who's the father of Julian Amory, another handler of Gladio, was a big part of the push to oust the British king, the Nazi king, get Neville Chamberlain out and insert somebody like a Churchill who would be a little bit less overtly fascist, though still evil. Don't get me wrong, not the good guy, right? He was happy to kill millions of Indians. His motive, his religion was the British Empire. So, but he was more favorable to those who said, well, we'd rather not accept the conditions which Hitler is giving us, which is that under the New World Order, we're going to be somehow like equal or maybe even junior partners to the Nazis. Some were okay with that. And they thought that, yeah, okay, we'll do that. And then we'll become the dominant alphas later in a few decades. Other ones, like I said, those who I just mentioned, who were against Oswald Mosley, who, by the way, Tucker Carlson gave a little clean defense of in his interview with Cooper, saying that, oh, yeah, Churchill was so bad, he even, jailed an innocent politician, one of his political opponents, like Oswald Mosley and his wife. How bad was that? And it's like, way to, let the personal drama completely cloud any of the historic lessons that anybody might otherwise learn about what the hell was going on. All that to say, there's factions, and some factions have their self-interest a little bit more reasonably in tune than others. I think today, whatever that grouping is of that liberal fascist intelligentsia that Sachs is devoted to, they're at least aware enough that Russia and China and other countries are serious about their threats and their red lines, and that this could go holy smokes, right? Like scorched earth in a very out of control way. They were willing to do scorched earth nuclear war to the degree that they fully controlled as much as they could the terms and conditions of the outcome of the war, with the collateral damage being isolated to the mainland of Europe and Asia. But even that, I think that they would have preferred not even that. So I think, yeah, Sachs is like one of those who have been deployed to try to steer the ship in a different direction. It's not so easy because so much effort has been put into the momentum of this warship. And I ultimately, my point, I guess, when I warn of Sachs is simply to say, enjoy the show to the degree that he's being induced to do something useful for his handlers, but don't believe that he's the hero that some people have come to treat him as if he was this Road of Damascus converted person who's now a noble figure whom we should just take in, because there's Trojan horses in his analysis even now that he is infusing, which I think if the Russians or the Chinese intelligentsia are weak-minded and believe all of the Trojan horses he is trying to infuse, then they will create the spark of their own doing in the next years ahead, because there's certain things about his view of Keynes, John Maynard Keynes, who is his godhead. Like, he's not a religious man, but he does see Keynes. He reads Keynes every night before he goes to bed, as he says he does, like as a Christian would read the Bible. He is a believer in Lord Bertrand Russell's Principia Mathematica, and he's given speeches, many lectures to the London School of Economics going through his devotion to Bertrand Russell's Principia Mathematica, and he gave also presentations that I've also researched. I've done the work, so I know he's truthful, except he's okay with that the basis of Bertrand Russell's Principia Mathematica that he co-wrote with Alfred North Whitehead between 1910 and 1913, what was that? It was Russell's attempt to try to codify the entirety of the universe and reduce the whole universe to a limited set of axioms and postulates that can be logically described and unfolded into the future and into the past, with the idea of like Laplace's demon, right? Like, if you could know all of the data about the universe and trajectories and weights of everything going on in every galaxy and plug it all into a computer, then would you not be like an omniscient God who could know everything that's ever been and everything that will ever be? That's essentially what Bertrand Russell was trying to posit as a yes, and he was trying to rehabilitate Newton's Principia Mathematica that had only recently been overturned by the new discoveries in quantum mechanics and general theory that people like Max Planck and Madame Curie and Pierre Curie and Albert Einstein were making. They were basically demonstrating that there's no linear space, there's no limited array of axioms that everything can be reduced to, there's no empty space, everything is quality everywhere, and that there's a relationship between the subjective mind of a researcher, of a seeker, and the objective qualities of that which is sought in the universe that we are a part of. We're not outside of the universe like a Laplace's demon looking at it from above. we're all a part of it. And the more we come to know the universe, as Einstein described in his philosophical text, and as Max Planck or Madame Curie, they all write about their own process. The more you come to know yourself, the more you know the outside, the more you know the inside, and the more you make discoveries, the more you could share, the more you could share, the more you could translate your new discoveries into means by which society technologically improves and overcomes limits to growth. To the degree that we overcome limits to growth and break free of those formerly limited sets of assumptions that were monopolized in the former set before our discoveries were made, then the oligarchy's Malthusian formulas of population reduction and everything else fail. It fails. So Bertrand Russell, as Jeffrey Sachs says, he is a devoted disciple of Russell, a Cambridge apostle, just like Lord Maynard Keynes, a Cambridge apostle. And if you want to be like, if you want to know who are the real strategic, like, so-called evil geniuses, I would say look at the Cambridge apostles. Alfred North Whitehead, Cambridge apostle. This is like the upper echelons of the oligarchical management. That's what you have to look at. And then he identifies how that translated into a student of Bertrand Russell. And I'm talking about a series of lectures he gave to the London School of Economics, a Fabian Society school, which is bankrolled by Lord Russell. One of his students was Norbert Wiener. Norbert Wiener studied under Russell at Cambridge, was one of Russell's boys, probably did some weird stuff with his boys, as they all do in Cambridge. And he came out of this kind of broken and generated cybernetics. So he's working now for the US Navy, naval intelligence, working on radar, and he's the guy who generated cybernetics as the practical application to the theoretical model of Bertrand Russell in his Principia Mathematica, which was basically a feedback loop system that was then incorporated and funded by the Josiah Macy Foundation, that was formerly the biggest sponsor of eugenics, along with the Rockefeller Foundation. They produced the Josiah Macy Foundation conferences on cybernetics from 1944 all the way up until 1949. This is what Gregory Bateson, Margaret Mead, all of the MK Ultra psychiatrists and anthropologists were all brought into these Macy Foundation cybernetics conferences that generated things like Rand Corporation out of the U.S. military-industrial complex that was tied to Lockheed Martin, as well as MI6. All of this stuff was created to start changing decision-making from humans into objective, logical, essentially proto-AI. That's what Stanley Kubrick was making fun of in Dr. Strangelove. That was a real thing. That's what Henry Kissinger was acting upon. You know, and Kissinger was one of the composite characters around which Strangelove was created, as was Leo Szilard, a fanatical follower of the Fabian Society, and H.G. Wells, who created the atomic bomb, with the idea that, that if people could be unified around fear of the other and fear of something destructive like the atomic bomb, as H.G. Wells said in his books earlier, then they could give their acquiescence to a new type of society around a one world government, the abolishment of the ideas of religion, of God, of family, of faith, of morality, and have a new type of society emerge. And that became the driver of transhumanism. So again, Jeffrey Sachs has been incubated in this religion for a long time, and he was assigned to play a very important role in overseeing a new priesthood in the case of Russia, but also in China, which he also has very big penetrations in China, huge penetrations in China amongst the Chinese intelligentsia. And it scares me a little bit to think about the level of seduction. All you got to do is really just, he's good at speaking the language of the Confucians, but he hates what they're based upon. But he's able to imbibe trust where he doesn't deserve it with people who, if they do trust him, will come undone by what he's infusing into them in the coming decades. So that's a concern I have.
There's a lot up in this chat. I've been reading it, and I mean, it's going on. But we have one on the screen. It says Tucker lied about the British role in India. His supremacist narrative is disgusting. You can take that, but before you address that, Gold Mode 242 and Speaking the Truth Both I'm going to condense both of their statements into something that pretty much goes along with what I think. Because I listen to Mr. Sachs on all of these different shows, and it seems like he does not want to go to war with Russia, but he is A-okay with going to war with China. And it seems as though he, it's not okay for China to rule the South China Sea and to dominate the Asian space, but it is okay for the United States to maintain dominance over an area where it does not reside. So, and you can elaborate on that. You can give your opinion on that, but also on what Faye says about Tucker lied about the British role in India.
Tucker lied about the British role in India a lot. And when he had a show on Fox News, he did some sniveling, disgusting defenses of the British Empire's grandeur in India and how much the Indians should be grateful to the British for having built like a really nice looking train station. It was disgusting what he's done as an apologist for the British Empire. It's gross. I think he's a closet monarchist who's subverting the foundations upon which the U.S. was built. I think that that's the case. I think he's also a Kabbalist. I think he's also into probably some demonology as well. If you want to ask me personally, that's all. Huh?
What about? I have to get your opinion on this because I hear a lot of people saying that Musk is this guy that's going to restore free speech. Isn't he an agent of these intelligence agencies? Because you can't get that rich and can't get that powerful without them giving the okay to that.
Yeah, I don't trust Musk at all. I don't want to be like, I'm a realist in the sense that I believe that you can be a very rich person in a corrupt system and still maintain your conscience and be a human. I believe that. But to be the richest man or the second richest man in this level of a corrupt system and somehow be an authentic person, I don't believe that. There's so many things about Musk which cause me to shudder. I guess in a brushstroke way, some elements that cause me grave concern is his ideological commitment to transhumanism, which for me, that's like super toxic elitist religion. He believes that human beings must merge with machinery in order to stay relevant, or else he believes that the self-conscious AI will necessarily replace us in a Darwinian evolution, as does Peter Thiel, who also wrote a paper called The Revenge of the Straussians. He's a Straussian. He believes in Leo Strauss's doctrines. Leo Strauss was very closely affiliated with the Frankfurt School that was brought in to the United States, especially, and empowered especially under Allen Dulles of the CIA to shape our Western education systems or misshape them. Peter Thiel is a transhumanist, but where the conservatives would typically be disgusted and repulsed by the transhumanist narrative when it's spoken aloud by people like a Yuval Harari, they're disgusted by that. They become very soft and all of a sudden super susceptible to accepting it when it's given to them by a figure like a Peter Thiel or an Elon Musk. Musk is somebody who I don't think is a real person. I think he's a human being biologically, but I think his mind is just like Thiel. I see somebody who's of the similar quality of mental state as like a Justin Trudeau, who's coached, who has handlers, who is brought into, who's trained to have human emotions or to fake human emotions in public or to say certain logistical syllogisms that might be catchy when they're in public or in an interview or let's say hosting a show, but never permitted to go out into a hostile environment that is not very controlled. They're not allowed to go out in areas where they won't be around people who worship them. And Musk has also shown himself to be a promoter of regime change. I've followed what he's been doing to try to promote a libertarian version of regime change against Maduro in Venezuela, his support for Malay and Malay's break from the BRICS, and destruction of the Argentinian economy by doing exactly what Pinochet did back in Chile in the 1970s. That's what Milei is doing. He's just privatizing everything. It's not all that revolutionary. He's just using like an anti-woke language, which Christians get very soft on and they find very like attractive. But then if you look at everything he's doing economically, it's all the same stuff that the fascists, the Nazi-sponsored fascists like Pinochet were doing in Latin America to privatize the economy and open it up to the free markets on behalf of those, IMF, World Bank interests and Bilderberger interests that Peter Thiel is a member of. He's on the steering committee of the Bilderberger Group. Who again, Thiel and Musk, they co-create. They're two assets who were brought up in a Silicon Valley environment. Both have shady backgrounds. They both work together to create PayPal and X, which is tied to PayPal. Both of them in the 90s. And, Elon Musk, look at his grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, like how could you look at that and think, okay, that has nothing to do with Elon Musk. Who is Joshua Haldeman? Joshua Haldeman is the founder of the Technocracy Party of Canada. Like it was a party that wanted to overthrow the entire political system of nation states and create a one world government of scientific engineers. They were very eugenics leaning. That's what the Technocracy Party was, Technocracy Inc. And before that, Joshua Haldeman was the founder of the Saskatchewan Cooperative Commonwealth Federation in 1933. That's the Fabian Society branch in Canada. That's the Fabian Society of Canada of 1933. This guy was working with 5 Rhodes Scholars from Oxford who set up the Canadian Fabian Society that had a political branch that became later on the NDP. But before that, it was the Cooperative Commonwealth Federation. And then when that wasn't getting off the ground, he went and created the Technocracy Party. And then he created the Social Credit Party of Saskatchewan. He was the president of it. And then what does he do? What does he do after he goes to jail for being on the wrong side of World War II? He gets out of jail. And then what does he do? He goes to the most freedom-loving place on earth that he loves and lives out his life. South Africa, apartheid South Africa. And that's where he becomes like one of the rich white elitists whose son ends up, like his daughter becomes May, the supermodel weird witch who's got some strange occult proclivities, who ends up dating this other dude who's Errol Musk, who's like owns a giant emerald mine, super rich people who are like bankrolling their kid who ends up like coming to Canada, meeting some weird people, getting sent up to Sanford. And then all of a sudden now he's like a multimillionaire after coming up with some ideas that weren't even his own. Like from everybody who worked with him from his earliest startup companies in the late 90s, they all have the same messaging that he was incompetent. He couldn't come up with even his own code. All of the code he tried to do had to be rewritten by others who were brought in. It strikes me that this type of personality type is a useful cardboard cutout, as like a Bill Gates, whose father was also Bill Gates Sr., right? A close associate of David Rockefeller and the president of Planned Parenthood, a major driver of the depopulation lobby. His mother also had some weird ties to AT&T, not AT&T, yeah, AT&T, no, IBM, and they just had a bad reputation, IBM, of being the thing that was working with the Nazis and overseeing the infrastructure for the concentration camps. And they had that reputation in the 60s and the 70s, and people didn't feel comfortable bringing like home-based computing systems into their homes because they were so closely tied to the Nazis. So what do they have to do? Well, find a little cardboard cutout kid whose life would be pre-programmed to be the front man, who would be given a story about how he's a genius who just like generated operating systems in his garage. And then we'll call it, Microsoft. And people will bring that into their house. They'll trust Microsoft. They'll trust these things. So that's what they did, And so now we have Microsoft that everybody has in their house and on their phones and everywhere else. That's also pushing for virus controls and creating viruses that they put into our operating systems that they then introduce the solution, right? The antivirus to control viruses that they put out in the 90s into our computers. I'm not talking about anything else, so no need to censor this video if anybody might be watching. I'm talking about computers, computer viruses. You know what I'm saying, right? So, yeah, I don't trust Elon Musk. No.
Hey, Collie Beans, you're right. Mesheimer. That's who I was meaning, not.
Yeah. I was like, there's no way.
That's who I was talking about. I couldn't get his name right, and you're right.
No, Mearsheimer sucks. Mearsheimer sucks. He's okay with Russia, but yeah, like you said, he sucks with China, and he just believes that we should go back in time to 2005 when Putin was still open to joining NATO, and he just wants that time machine so that we could both team up on China together. But yeah, he's limited. He's a very limited, useful person.
Yeah, thank you for correcting me on that. I was trying to think of his name, and I made a mistake and said that was who was it that we were talking about before? Who is Sachs? I believe I made a mistake and said Sachs, but it was Mesheimer that I was referring to. So I want to thank Collie Beans for correcting me on that. Thank you so much, because his name, I could not think of his name for anything, but you understood what I was saying. Now, before we go, because we've had Matthew on for a long time, guys. We've had him on for a long time. Hit the like button. That's what you need to do, everybody. Matthew, do you believe that Facebook, Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, and all, they have to be connected with the intelligence agencies in order for them to build up these corporations? And all of them have pretty much the same story. They stole other people's ideas and they were elevated to huge success off the back of other people to become these billionaires. Do you believe that they're pushed by the intelligence agencies?
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Okay, we're going to close out on that note. We're going to close out on that note. Matthew, thank you so much, man, for giving me. It was only supposed to be 30 minutes, and you gave me almost triple that, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, Rashid, it's a pleasure with you, man. I don't mind doing this at all. I could have gone on for 2 hours. This is fun.
Hey, man, thank you so much for joining me. We got to do this again, man, when we have both of us have some time for it, man. Hey, be blessed.
Anytime.
And be safe.
You too. Bye.
Everybody. All right. Everybody, listen, thank you. We gave you a double hitter today. A double hitter. And it's a double hitter also. We hit it out the park with both guests. You got to join us. I think we're going to do a channel member stream tomorrow, if I'm not mistaken. It may be tomorrow or it may be Saturday. But Friday, we have Larry Wilkerson on the show. It'll be at 2 p.m. Central Time, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You got to join us on that. Hey, everybody, support by sharing, hitting the like button, subscribing, all of that stuff. Check your notification. Matter of fact, hit that notification button right now. And we're going to keep giving you these powerful shows with these powerful guests. You might not agree with everything they say, but hey, the best way to enlighten yourself is to get all of these different views, and then you analyze them and come up with the thing that best suits you. On that note, know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that God has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous and do right by others, not because other people are watching or because there's some gain in it for you. Do right by others because it's the right thing to do. And even when the whole world is looking away, know that God always has his eye on you. So on that note, put that to heart and know that mama, guess what? Your baby boy still loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody. Thank you all for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth. We're out of here with peace.